I just picked up on one of your objectives of creating a happier nation. The Bhutanese king, the father of the current king, proclaimed many, many years ago, his nation is not measuring its prosperity based on the GDP, but on GNH, gross national happiness. Now, we've been grappling with this, and when Avanti invited me to join the megapolis planning project and said, I want you to assess the sustainability of the plan, not the megapolis which is happening now, but the plan in part. One of the 45 to 50 indexes that I studied in developing the first composite index in the world, and I at some stage we need to discuss this. I'm not very sure whether megapolis passed any of the 24 on that, and whether the megapolis in a world order where we are moving into ecopolis, we are moving into a different kind of old model that has been proven not very healthy to nations. So Vidura, I would like to go to Vidura Ralapanava, who's a general manager, environmental sustainability as Mars Intimates. Excuse me for saying this, but in Taiwan, I had a friend, a businessman, who called himself Green Robin Hood. And every time you and I sit in the same panel, reminds me of him, and I think we have our own Green Robin Hood in Sri Lanka. Vedura, I just want to drive to the same questions I asked Sunil in getting to this. Is the business sector geared towards implementing the SDGs, or I saw a basket from the basket that you have selected some, but the SDGs are very interlinked and it's a systems based. It's very hard to remove one and pick another. And Vidura, where do you come into this? Is the private sector a partner in this process where SDG 17 is all about making the 2030 agenda for transformation happen?
Okay, so let me come at it from a slightly different angle. I have a background in climate science. The question I have is, what model of development can work with the current projections of both climate change impacts and environmental stresses? From my understanding, the answer is that there is no model of development if we continue the current path globally that will get a country like Sri Lanka into any semblance of what we might call development. I'll contextualize it by saying, we started the sessions by talking about floods that happened this year, and then there was floods that happened last year. Seriously look at the way Sri Lankan climate works and how climate change is going to impact us. We are looking at a world where a massive natural disaster or two is going to be common every year. If that's the projection, we need to ask, what does development, is development possible? Let's ask that question first. Is development possible? And the answer is quite likely no. How does that relate back to business? If this kind of a natural stresses are going to impact the ecology of the country, how resilient is our supply chains? How resilient are our employees? How resilient are our customers, both local and global? So we are getting into a quite uncharted territory now. We've had disruptions in the world before, but what we are experiencing now globally through climate change is a very, very high variability, high risk of really significant disruptive climate-related impacts coming and challenging us into the business. Now, why are SDGs important within that context? It's very straightforward. One of the things SDGs do is actually ask you to think about 2030. Because if you look at our corporate sector sustainability strategies, there's very few of them who's actually visualizing what the world will look like in 2030 if we extrapolate current ecological challenges, current societal challenges, and current economic challenges. Okay, so let me give you a good example. We had Professor Robert Watson, who was the founder chairman of IPCC, the Governmental Panel of Climate Change, visiting Sri Lanka. And he asked a very simple question. He asked, when you are designing port city, at what level of sea level rise can it withstand? And I have a secondary question. Once that is built, with sea level rise is going on, what are the coastal tourism locations in the western side of the country which will have a viable beach to sustain tourism? The reason why SDGs are important is that if you start visualizing within your organization, leave the SDGs aside, you don't need to touch them, they're complicated. Think of the world 2030 and ask, is our business resilient enough to survive in this world? And if it's not, what is it that we need to do now so that we have a viable business which rests on a viable society, which rests on a working ecology? And then we really have to come to we can only come to one conclusion. If we are not aggressively addressing the developmental issues, the ecological issues, and the social issues now, we do not have a world that can sustain viable businesses in 2030. It's very, very straightforward. Just one more point, Uchita, I want to add. The question in this context is, what is the role of private sector versus what is the role of government? Mr. Sunil Sethi said that we want government to inspire us. No, we can't. It's not going to happen. Because even businesses can't visualize the kind of challenges that's going on now. It's not a job of government, neither is it a job of business, it's a job of all of us. So unless we get together and start visualizing what is the future of Sri Lanka within these kind of constraints and contexts, we will all lose. So that's my answer towards the partnership question, Ushita.
Thank you. Thank you, Vidura. I was thinking that I'll go to Prashanti, but I'm tempted at the end of where Vidura ended to go to Avanti. Avanti is the government providing a coherent political, policy, and institutional environment for the private sector to effectively engage in sustainable development agenda. Now, Avanti Jayatilaka starts from the policy sector, from the government, moves into the private sector, and tries to balance the between environmental policy to the whole gamut of this. Within the next 5 minutes, can you respond to Vidura's challenge and then what we heard as well, but just bring into the interface, where does the government policy process and the private sector interface comes into place, and where is the facilitation?
Thank you, Uchita. Yeah, the answer is cannot be straightforward. Let me take you, the government policy making basically is sometimes it's not clear. So we have announcements, we have legislation, we have various administrative orders coming up, and then this is supposed to be the macro policy, and we had been talking about it in this forum, and we try to sort of understand and shape our sectoral actions within this policy. But doing so, I have seen the sectoral ministries, sectoral agencies bring their mandate or their short-term agenda to the forefront. This confuses everybody. As a result, some chairmen and some strongmen, muscle men, if you can call it, want to really perform by showing the profits. Profits at the cost of the society, profit at the cost of the environment. And this is not anywhere in the policy, but it is within their mandate. So they are judged by the performance that these institutions are. Sometimes these government agencies start trying to show profits. Everybody, right? So I sometimes find it difficult. Where's the difference? And okay, you can understand the certain areas where the profit has to be shown, you have to show it. Where the private sector come in, you need to trim down and you have to really become less active. So in this context, whether our policies are clear and get reflected through the sectoral agencies, not very. So as a result of that, a lot of investors do get confused, do get sent from pillar to post and get fed up and go away. Right now we are pressed with a huge problem of solid waste management in the capital city. Any capital city is supposed to have a proper solid waste disposal or a management system. We don't have it. From 1990 or 83, I would say we had been trying to find various places to have a sanitary landfill. It went on, created two huge mountains, one in Blumandal, one in Mituramulla. We waited until the disaster struck, and where is the policy? There's nothing like that. Now we have a situation where we really looked at a situation at extra speed, super speed. We are trying to solve this problem, and in trying to solve this problem, agencies are trying to say no. The land will be given, land is not given. Now there is a tug of war. So this is not good. So you have to really have that policy is clear, and if the things have to happen. Now I just sort of having said this, I don't know whether it can be seen well, but basically what I have put out there is normally the challenges this any private sector agency enterprise that is going to face. This really is the statutory requirement and the compliance issues. Then we have the market competitiveness, which had been highlighted. Then the finance, how well we can really meet these finances. Then the skills, HR, and the so forth, and innovation. If you can lay out these requirements or the challenges that private sector will face. But you see, the point I am making here is, we tend to talk about this corporate sector, the large corporate agencies. But what contributes to our economy, and time to come, will be with the SMEs. Now, SMEs and the corporate sector reflect and sometimes respond differently to the challenges. It's like when you really look at what the impacts or the way this response, the various government policies, you can't have one blanket policy, one the kind of a general policy to cater to these two different, because large corporations have their external forces guiding them, they're meeting those demands, and possibly even appearing or kind of branding themselves as environmentally friendly, which is questionable to a large extent in how environment friendly they are. And then the supply chain that is supplying it, which consists mostly of the private, the small and medium. We have this problem of meeting, and they are not being helped. That is an issue why we cannot make this green growth all the way down to the society and down to the people. So I'll stop there, and we can clarify and we can discuss it further. Thank you.
Thank you, Avanti. brings me finally to Dr. Prashanthi Gunawardana, who has obtained her PhD in environmental economics and is currently the head of Department of Forestry and Environmental Science at Sri Jayewardenepura University. At the beginning of this year, to be precise, on the 2nd of January, His Excellency the President proclaimed that Sri Lanka has entered a sustainable era, Tirasara Yugaya. And what that means is that we are no longer planning for development. We are planning for sustainable development. So on one side, the country continues to discuss development plans, and the budgets are defined and designed to cater to what is called the development projects, programs, and the profits that you were talking about. Now, what I'm asking Prashant is that now that we have entered a sustainable era, can Sri Lanka afford to continue propagating a high carbon, high growth economic model in this, what we keep on calling a short term economic growth for prosperity? Can we afford that? And have we truly entered a sustainable era? And what does it mean if we have entered a sustainable era? And how does the resource economics play into this whole macroeconomics modeling of this nation?
Thank you, Uchita. As I see it, our present economic system to me is like, failing to achieve, whatever we are saying as under the sustainable development or the SDGs. As individually also, as market, the companies, industries, all of us are failing. To me, this is basically a suiciding economy. We are destroying our own requirements. Let me take few examples. From the current present economic system, what we can see is the, in fact, this is the economic theory. The markets fail to control pollution, and the companies who are controlling pollution are penalized by the market. So this is economic theory. So I don't think any company or any industry can escape from that. That's the truth. So individually also we make the same mistake. For example, if you think of the solid waste you generate, each solid waste 1 kilogram costs the economy nearly 40 rupees. Nearly 40 rupees of cost from the health economic point of view, and then the global damage cost point of view, we create that individually. And think of the companies in this country. I have done a few estimates for the major companies, the manufacturing companies. For example, the cement manufacturing, the only manufacturing, there's only one company. The greenhouse gases that they emit, nearly 4 billion. That is the 1 year annual cost. So the thing is, actually, this is not felt by the company, but by the entire nation and the entire global. It is coming back to us as the climate change, one of the speakers mentioned. And also, if you think about the same company, the vehicle pollution and the energy generation, these are nearly 2 billion annual cost to the country, again, which is not felt by the company. The company is showing profit because these are all external costs to their company. And also think about another thing we have forgotten, that the pollution damage, as well as we have forgotten the nature's values. So that's why we are keeping on destroying our forest. We can keep plant here and there. Tree planting, it's even forest department does not recommend tree planting in the roadside or whatever, because what they need is the forest, the entire forest, the entity replacement. So a small calculation shows that 1 hectare of upper watershed forest in the watershed protection itself worth 50,000 rupees. And also I did another calculation to show the benefit of the pollination agents in this country. We as economists, as a contained environment in an artificial building in the middle of a Colombo city, we never see pollinators here, but pollinators are the ones who drive our agricultural economy. Yeah. So the economic value can be near to 50 billion in a year. So out of that, nearly 40 billion goes to the coconut pollination because one of the main crops. Without these pollinators, you never get coconut crop. So these are important. And at the same time, our agriculture also, I think, just like our economy, it's suiciding. It's destroying its own pollinators. And the pesticide annual cost we are importing to this country, including insecticides, weedicides, and the fungicides, it's nearly 13 billion. I did this calculation for the year 2009, so the figure should be much higher now. So 13 billion, these are the official figures from the WHO and the Sri Lankan Pesticide Registrar's Office. So, I mean, the current economic system, to me, it's failing its duties, creating many externalities to the outside world, to the communities, and the neighborhood communities. So therefore, I think we have to think about a complete shifting of the entire way of thinking, and the models we thought of, like, I mean, our GDP is anyway increasing. You never get any of these issues reflected in our GDP. So that's why we are, I mean, recommending the government to go for the green accounting, where you show the real damages. So in the industry accounts and the forestry accounts. So therefore, I think we will be able to get a clear picture where we are going, because we think we are in a wrong path and it's not shown by our statistics. So this is really unfortunate.
Thank you, Prashanti. Rekwan, you've been sitting for the last hour. I've just timed, we are exactly past an hour. And hearing three Sri Lankans looking at what a sustainable era means and how do we transform ourselves by 2030. You and I sat down in the last two seats going through a session where we heard about the China investment model into Sri Lanka, the Singaporean planning model into the megapolis of Sri Lanka, and so on and so forth. Now, you have been driving the whole concept of green growth. You and I have had powwows at the UN many years ago on the concept of green growth. And I have had powwows with Akim Steiner on the green economy model. But essentially, we are pitching somewhere close. Now, while driving, Korea has been in the forefront of driving the green growth model with OECD and ESCAP. Tell me, what is the experience of Korea in driving green growth? And do you think Sri Lanka is anywhere closer to what you're hearing and seeing and in your research towards moving into a green growth, greener economy and towards prosperity and a transformation?
Thank you, Uchida. Very difficult question to answer. Actually, I was running through my PowerPoint so quickly, and actually I have too much to talk, actually, to explain. What I meant that the job of transformation is a government. What I meant for that is, that does not mean that climate change is the job of the only government. My point was, the green growth can happen only when government can introduce visible and invisible economic system structure change. Without system change, green growth cannot happen if we are just maintaining the same brown economic system and we are just dreaming about greener growth. It's a pipe dream. So we have to really sit down to the real business and overhauling our economic system. That is what I was emphasizing. And then for that job, it is actually one of the jobs governments can do. Of course, green accounting is one of the examples of what governments can do. But more fundamentally, the government's main job is investing in human capital and the natural capital for long-term goals, while the economy and the private sector is focusing on investing for short-term return. So there is a basic, fundamental time gap issue. So who will bridge this time gap? I'm saying that it is the job of the government. So government has to institutionalize very comprehensive transitional program to make green growth happen. And also I'd like to emphasize that the meaning of green growth means green can drive economic growth, which is greener. and more sustainable. That is the meaning of green growth. For example, the problems of private sector causing all the environmental externality, then my point is that there's no point of us to simply accusing the private sector. I'm here not to just accusing the private sector. The point is how we can institutionalize a system, policy framework, where private sectors can perform better to some kind of compliance mechanism, and also at the same time, government should also invest for disposal, proper disposal of solid waste and agricultural waste. This is, to a certain degree, is a job of the government. It's not only the job of the private sector. Lastly, for your question about Korea, Korea started green growth, but it just started and then stopped because of the change of government. The succeeding government kicked it out, and green growth no longer can be found in Korea. So this is the example I would explain to you. Long-term consistency is very critical.
Thank you. Ralph, I just want to continue on the same thread. World Bank continues to advise Sri Lanka on various economic modeling, positioning, on investment modeling. Are you advising Sri Lanka on a green growth model, green economic model? Are you asking Sri Lanka to invest on a sustainable era and transform in 2030?
We advise the government on several areas. For example, on things like biodiversity and wetlands in Colombo. We also try to address the competitiveness of the country, so help improve competitiveness. So we look at the impact. For example, if you look at foreign direct investment, in which we are giving some advice, we try to instill the sense of that the investment you'd like to attract, it has to be both appropriate for the country in terms of having the country has the proper endowments to attract those investments, but also it has the proper impact on the country, and the impact could be in terms of creating the right types of jobs, creating jobs particularly for women, given the low labor participation of women. So there are, we try to, whenever we give advice, also we try to instill that, that to look further than just the target, so the volume of investment, but also the quality, and attracting the quality in terms of what it does for your economy and for your society.
Vedura, I have a question from Anonymous, from the audience. Don't you think we are adding lip service to renewable energy? Look at our costs. There is a diesel mafia. Can we know what are the installed capacities of the sources of energy and what is the long-term strategy of installed capacity of renewables? I think this is perfectly syncing with the discussion we are having as well. And naturally, it goes to you, Vidura.
I can't tell you the installed capacity so far, so I'm going to refrain from doing that. What we have seen in the past 10 years or so is a significant increase of fossil fuel-based generation in Sri Lankan energy mix. Unfortunately, we have also seen, even though we talk a lot about renewable energy expansion, institutional hurdles for people who actually want to bring in and invest in renewable energy. Part of the problem in this context is, let's look at what is happening globally. If you look at most of the economies around the world is currently planning for 100% renewable-oriented grid. Now that is structurally very different from a centralized generation, fossil fuel-oriented grid. We are not even having that conversation in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, when we decide instead of coal, we are going to do LNG, we think we have crossed Mount Everest. So this is silly. Sri Lanka has enough and more resources to run this country, and in a way, we can get to a 100% renewable-based economy much faster than most other countries. What is the reason? Most part of the world, they already have a totally paid up fossil fuel-based grid. We are developing our own grid. And currently our trajectory is, let's also build a fossil fuel grid in the next 20 years, and then let's start dismantling it to put to a renewable energy grid. This is silly. So we haven't had clear institutional pathway, although at policy level, we talk about renewable energy being grid. The only positive thing I can say is that in the current, last week, Public Utilities Commission gave direction to the CEB, and they said at the next generation plan, they should build a scenario which is 60% renewables. I think that is far too less. We actually have more capacity to, more capability to do that. And these are the kind of things that we are, as a country, we are lacking, because we really don't have the level of imagination to break free from the colonial model that's imposed on us, right? We are trying to follow Europe or US as they are now in 2030. We are trying to get there by 2030, as opposed to asking, even if you want to follow them, as opposed to asking, what is the energy grid in Germany going to look like in 2030? And asking, can we get there faster? Why not? So, I mean.
Thank you. I'm being amused here. I'm getting some fantastic questions. And Sunil, many of them are targeting you. Now, what sustainability policies are embedded by companies beyond selective CSR into their business operations? Is selling 2 glasses of milk more important than developing sustainable local supply chains and addressing polluting one-time use packaging? Hold on, one more. And it says, Sunil, if you are green, should you not be giving fresh milk to this nation and not powdered milk? This walk the talk session?
Whosoever has asked this question, thank you very much. Let me just start by saying that, look, it is not only social, economic, or ecological sustainability. All 3 are important. And it's about choices amongst the private sector companies in terms of where you think you can maximize your impact and do it in a focused manner versus doing a little everywhere. We do work on water, we do work on energy, and that I did not mention, but that's always on, along with the other work that we do. Second question about why not liquid milk? Sri Lankans as a generation have grown up with milk powder. There is a total production of 330 million liters of milk in the country annually. These are government statistics, I'm not creating them. Out of which 220 million liter comes back into the market. The balance is consumed somewhere in the middle, either by the farmers themselves or somewhere lost due to supply chain inefficiencies. That 220 million liters, if you convert the entire thing into powder, you can make 28,000 tons of powder. The annual demand is almost 100,000 tons, to be precise, around 92,000 tons. So there is a 70,000 ton gap. Country is not milk self-sufficient, right? Second is a habit of growing up with milk powder. I have grown up in my country consuming liquid milk. I just cannot consume milk powder, right? I grew up eating paranthas. My daughter takes cornflakes, but I can't. So I think it takes a couple of generations to change food habits. Are we doing enough to help in that? Absolutely. We collect a very small amount compared to a lot of our competitors. We collect about 50,000 or 45,000 liters of milk every day, which is locally produced. We convert that into flavored milk, into yogurt, and are providing alternative forms of dairy nutrition to grow that, right? So that's one part answer. Second part, yogurt cups, plastic. Fully agree with whosoever has asked that question. Very valid question. I think we as an industry need to look at that. But a solution of saying, we will charge you $5 and then you go and collect the yogurt cups from every outlet, the empty cups, it can't be more ridiculous than that. I think what we need to do as an organization, as a government, to look at sustainable packaging, to slowly move to that and get rid of that. So it's not that we are running away from that. It's just that what we get worried is that knee-jerk reactions and knee-jerk solutions suggested to something which we know is not going to work in the long term. So, ecological, social, economical, all three are important. Whatever we choose to do has an impact on the others. Liquid milk, absolutely. I will urge you all to take in liquid milk. I will save all the taxes, etc. that I pay, right? We are working on growing that milk, and I spoke to you about that. And plastic packaging, work is on to get it sorted. And that has to be an industry effort.
Thank you, Sunil. Seriously, thank you. Because we intend to move away from powder. I don't want to get into this debate. But let's get into the macroeconomics and stuff. There's a question. There are many environmental plans, but they are not sufficiently reflected in economic plans in Sri Lanka. I'll give you another background to this. UNDP, UN, led by UNDP team, mapping, it's called MAPS mission, was in Sri Lanka a month ago or so. And their mission was to help assist plan the 2030 strategies implementing the SDGs. And Sri Lanka did not have a national strategic plan. So they were given one document called the Public Investment Program. The Public Investment Program, once you calculate it, has 1.1% or so on environmental protection, and social protection has about the same. So not even 2.5% out of the entire investment plan. Now, how do you expect a planning process for transformation to happen there? So again, tell me, please also don't isolate Sri Lanka. The UN system has 500 plus multilateral environmental agreements signed by our same leaders. And it is fragmented all over the place. So what's the problem here? Do we need more environmental plans not reflected in the economic plans?
I think, Ujita, you are touching on something fundamental in the planning process. And we are quite good at being driven by external forces, whether we like it or not. How did we start this environmental planning? From the World Summit, we have been driven by that. Even sustainable agenda, it is somewhat, there's nothing wrong in this. There's nothing wrong, but we are trying to sort of make it Sri Lankanized, right? And failing miserably in doing so. So this is what where the problem starts. I think when it comes to plans, biodiversity action plan, environmental action plan, climate change has several indices, and now that is the latest, and they keep on coming out. And none of these things are actually reflected in the economic plan. Now let us look at these sessions here. Where do we discuss about the sustainability? At the end of the session, when everybody is probably thinking of going home, 6th session or the 7th session. Why can't this be on the first session or second session so that it can set the pace? So that we have the framework of sustainability within which we discuss everything else. So still we tend to do this sustainability issue by the way. By the way, it is necessary. And this is a lot of companies reflect it in the CSR strategy. So it is not getting into the mainstream unless it become a regulatory, unless it become part of the planning process. Whether we like it or not, still with all the faults and the drawbacks, EIA is the only process that still allow some environmental aspects to get into the project. And we have, with all the drawbacks, still managed to bring in some sense, environmental sense into the projects. But it's not sufficient. It's totally inadequate. It needs to be revived. It needs to be get up to date, and many changes need to happen in this regard. So I think to answer your question, we are very good in planning because it's coming as a package to plan and produce. But after that, we go with the business of doing things as usual. Take the central bank report. At the end of each sector, you have a few lines about the sustainability issue. At least it is there now, right? But it need to be a lot more upfront, upstream, and then I think private sector will fall in line, and with this change of mindset. Thank you.
Thank you, Avanti. Vidura, we need to drive this back to this forum. It's an economic forum. If you look at the landscape of this participation, comes probably a lot from the private sector. Now, we are in a sustainable era, whether it's a proclamation from the president or not, because 193 leaders on earth have signed on to the 2030 agenda, because in 2012, going to Rio Plus 20, we said that there was no political will to implement the Agenda 21 agreed upon in 1992. Now, what is the role, or how does business become a partner? What is the partnership? What are the mechanisms of a partnership in this transformation from the private sector?
I'm going to speak about Sri Lanka because this is very contextual, because the role the business sector plays, and if we know where we want to go, we need to look at it and say what is not happening. So the issue that I see is that the government lacks capacity to think coherently and holistically on this. And I think, now, I would love to say this is where business has to support the government, but unfortunate situation is that I don't think the businesses are also capable of coherently and holistically thinking about it. For us, in general business sector in Sri Lanka, sustainability is a nice to have that you put in your report. It's for reporting. It makes your people feel good. It's not about critical business decision making, and that's a problem. We speak about economy, and we always privilege economic sense making over the ecological sense making. Now, this is fundamentally wrong. The second issue that we have is, the ecology is collapsing. Let's be very, very clear about this. Globally, the ecology is collapsing, and if it collapses, there is no economy for anybody to build businesses around. I think businesses have a critical role in actually thinking about this, because it's our long-term sustainability as well, and bringing this conversation up into the open, right? And I think this is the role that business has to play first, is to have a robust conversation about what this is. But there is something that the businesses has to do before that. We have to unlock our sustainability teams in the nice little cages that they've been put in. If the sustainability teams are not part of the critical business decision-making process in the company, we are not going to get to any kind of transformation inside the company. We are not going to get the kind of conversation inside the company that thinks long-term about these issues. And if the companies are not having this conversation, we cannot influence or drive the conversation within the state sector to build that.
Thank you. We're starting to wrap up. Prashanti, from the company to the nation and the transformation towards sustainable development, what are your final messages to to the forum.
Yeah, I mean, we are talking about the economic, ecological, and social sustainability as like three things we have to achieve. But I think it's a kind of a myth that we have been believing in for some time. And Vidura clearly mentioned, I mean, this whole earth, it has certain capacities to do certain things. So you cannot think about unlimited economic growth. I mean, the social development. So these all are within the ecology. So the entire ecosystem has the ultimate word. So you can't go beyond. I mean, whenever you try to go beyond, it will like reiterate back to us, I mean, in a very heavy way. So I think we have to understand that the limits of the nature as the ultimate word. So if you play all your roles within that, I think we are safe. So this is the final thing I have to say.
Thank you. And gentlemen, any final thoughts within 30 seconds, 40 seconds?
I think the final the issue is how can we present green as a profit opportunity for the business? Because the investing in the sustainability should be regarded as an opportunity for interest or a profit. Otherwise, there's no interest from the private sector. So actually, I have been documenting the examples where the companies investing in green and they make profit. So this is the kind of approach that we should present as an incentive for the private sector.
A quick one from my side. I think sustainability goals appearing on the scorecard is going to make a big difference. Second, and we are in the process of doing that, and now we are evaluated on that, and obviously when you're evaluated on something, you get more serious about it. Second thing, I think we're talking about a behavior change and a mindset change. We need to change our beliefs. We are not doing this for anybody. We are doing it for ourselves. We are doing it for generations to come, so that we leave them a place to live which really is livable. But otherwise, if we don't do that, it is going to be difficult.
It's important to get clear, consistent, and coherent policies on green growth for the private sector. Make sure you get the prices right. Make sure you value externalities, and then you'll see that many of these policies are in fact affordable and in the interest also of the business.
I would say that it's important for the private sector to engage the government on. I must congratulate the private sector on one front. Now, in the recent past, I have seen several platforms where private sector actively participate and try to do something, whereas many government institutions have failed to do so. So it's very important that private sector, in fact, engages government on some of these problems, especially on behalf of the SME sector. I think this is missing in our dialogue, discussion, and that groups like chambers, trade associations can play a very vital role in bringing this to the forefront and getting or facilitating this change towards the green growth.
Living in a ecologically aware household, the biggest problem I have is that I can't answer the questions that my daughters ask me. Kalpitia coral reef, 99% of it bleached this year. Whether we stick to Paris Agreement or not, there is nothing we can do to save the coral reefs around Sri Lanka and even the Great Barrier Reef. There's nothing, absolutely nothing. The question I have to ask is, before we become corporate practitioners, we become humans. And if there is no coral reefs, are we as much of a human or a less of a human? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasant surprise and a good evening to have 1.5 hours. I hope these 1.5 hours will reflect into the next 13 years and the transformation becomes a reality and you are committed to it. Thank you so much.